9 years. That's how long I devoted my life to Brightwell Solutions. 9 years of early mornings, late nights, and holidays spent at my desk instead of with my family. I was their top systems architect, the go-to person when things went wrong. No matter how chaotic it got, I always found a way to fix it. But on a gray, cloudy Wednesday, everything changed. I was called into a meeting, and all I got was a cold smile and 6 words that ended my career there. Your services are no longer needed. My name is Violet Ball, and this is the story of how Brightwell Solutions tried to erase everything I'd built, and how I made sure the world would remember my name instead. It started like any regular day. I spent my morning reviewing the latest integration reports for Axis Core, the AI-powered operations platform I had created from scratch. The launch for investors was just days away, and I had poured countless sleepless nights into perfecting every detail. This wasn't just another project. It was my legacy. At 4 p.m., I got an email marked urgent. There was no subject. It was just a summons to meet with Brian, the CEO, and Olivia from HR. My chest tightened. As I walked down the glass hallway, I passed the humming servers I had built and the framed company photos on the walls. Brian was in every picture, but I was nowhere to be found, even though I had been there for every milestone. In the conference room, Brian sat at the head of the table with a smug look, reading from a script. "Violet, we appreciate all you've done, but we're moving in a new direction. Effective immediately, your position is dissolved. No warning, no thanks. It's just corporate talk hiding a betrayal." I kept my face calm. I'd learned that silence can be more powerful than anger. "Would you like my laptop now?" I asked, steady and controlled. Olivia was surprised but nodded. I placed it gently on the table and stood up. 3 security guards were waiting outside. As they led me out, I turned back to Brian one last time. "Good luck with the investor meeting tomorrow," I said with a smile. "Without me." He raised an eyebrow, trying to look confident. "We'll manage." I smiled wider. "Let's hope so." When the elevator doors closed, I watched his face disappear behind the steel. That's when the countdown began. System failure in 10 minutes. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that Axis Core had a secret safeguard I had built in. If my credentials were ever removed, a security protocol would activate. Not to destroy the system, but to protect it from being stolen or misused. I'd learned the hard way that the biggest threats don't come from hackers outside, but from people like Brian, people who smile as they take what doesn't belong to them. 5 months earlier, I'd noticed odd server activity late at night, files being copied, logs changed. I traced it to Brian's assistant's account. I didn't say anything. Instead, I quietly built an invisible security shell around Axis Core, something only I could control. It wasn't revenge, it was insurance. They thought they could erase me, but they were only cutting out the one person who truly understood the system. The elevator opened to the lobby. I left the building carrying a small cardboard box, some photos, a plant, and a USB drive. I wasn't angry or even surprised. When you see betrayal coming, it doesn't hurt as much. Outside, the sky was dark and stormy, just like the mood inside Brightwell Solutions. Upstairs, they toasted to their victory, but the 10-minute clock was already ticking. At minute 2, the system registered a critical error. By minute 5, the processes started to crash. By minute 8, warning alerts flooded every engineer screen. And at 10 minutes, Axis Core shut down completely. A meltdown so severe that even the most experienced IT leads froze in disbelief. The investors were supposed to see the demo the next morning, but now the platform was a disaster with no clear way to recover. I could picture Brian's face when he realized what happened, the panic and disbelief. But I wasn't there to see it. Instead, I was at home on my couch, sipping chamomile tea, the television quietly playing in the background. I stared at my phone, waiting. For now, there was only silence. But right at 7 p.m., my phone rang. The caller was unknown, but I already had a good guess who it would be. "Violet, it's me," said a hurried voice. It was Jonathan, Brightwell's lead systems engineer, one of the only people there I actually respected. "You didn't hear this from me, but the system's down. Completely. Brian is freaking out. They think it's sabotage." I couldn't help but smile. "And what do you think, Jonathan?" I asked. "I think you built something too smart to be treated the way they did. And I think Brian is finally learning what happens when you burn the person who keeps everything running." He hesitated. "They're going to call you, you know. They need you." He was right. About 12 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was Mary, Brian's assistant. "Brian would like to speak with you," she said. Her voice was tight and formal. "It's urgent. We'll send a car to pick you up within the hour." I almost laughed. "Tell him I'm busy," I said. "Maybe tomorrow." There was a pause. Then, quietly, "Violet, please." That single please said everything. They weren't just annoyed. The whole company was terrified. Axis Core wasn't just a program. It was the heart of their investor pitch, their company's value, and their future. Now it was broken, and they were helpless. I stood up and went to my desk, opening a drawer to pull out a small black USB drive. This was the key. Not to destroy anything, but to make things stable again. What Brian and the board never understood was that Axis Core was more than just software. I built it with strong ethical rules and dynamic intelligence. It was designed to learn and adapt, but only when guided by someone it trusted. Deep in the system, I had written a special rule. Trust has to be earned. Credentials can be taken away, but real loyalty can't be faked. When they kicked me out, Axis Core saw it as a possible attack and did exactly what I'd trained it to do: protect itself, shut out suspicious commands, and lock down the system. By 7 p.m., another call came. This time, it was Brian himself. "Violet," he said, trying to sound calm, "we've had an unexpected hiccup. I think there's been some sort of authentication bug." "A bug?" I repeated, acting surprised. "Yes, we'd appreciate your help in resolving this." I pretended to think for a moment. Is this a freelance gig, or am I back on the payroll? There was a long silence. I could practically hear him grinding his teeth. "We can discuss that when you get here." I made him wait another hour before I agreed to come in. When I arrived back at Brightwell headquarters, the place was in chaos. Engineers rushed around, alarms flashed on monitors, and the air was thick with panic. Brian met me in the boardroom. His tie was loose, his hair was a mess. He looked like a man who had just lost everything and didn't realize yet how lucky he was that I'd shown up at all. "Can you fix it?" he asked. I pulled the USB drive from my pocket and set it on the shiny table. "I can," I said calmly, "but we need to talk first." He narrowed his eyes at me. "You think you're in a position to negotiate?" I leaned in, steady and confident. "I know I am." At that moment, the balance of power had shifted. I wasn't just the woman they had thrown away. I was the key to their entire future, and I had no plans to give that away for nothing. Brian stared at the USB drive as if it might explode. "Does this contain the fix?" His voice was tight. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence hang in the room until I saw him fidget and his jaw tighten. "It contains the protocol update," I finally said. "The system is working exactly as I designed it. But now, it no longer recognizes you or anyone at Brightwell as trusted." Brian scoffed, trying to sound confident. "That's ridiculous. We own it." "We paid for its development," Brian argued, trying to sound sure of himself. I let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "You paid for a product, Brian, but you never paid for understanding it, and you didn't pay for loyalty." His face tightened, but he couldn't come up with a comeback. He knew he'd lost control. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city lights. From up here, Brightwell seemed strong, even untouchable. But I knew the truth. I'd seen how weak the company's foundation really was. "I gave you 9 years, I said softly, not looking at him. "And you threw me away like I didn't matter. No warning, no meeting, not even a thank you." Brian stayed silent. I turned around to face him. "You didn't just fire me, Brian. You erased the person who built your entire infrastructure, without even a conversation. And now the system you were so eager to show off to your investors doesn't trust you. Tell me, Brian, how does that look from the outside?" He flinched just a little, but I noticed. That was when I knew he finally understood the mess he was in. "Tell me what you want," he muttered. There it was, the shift I'd been waiting for. I kept my voice steady. I want full recognition as Axis Core's lead architect. My name on every document, every patent, every press release. If you try to make me invisible, your system stays invisible too. Fair trade. Brian swallowed hard. What else? 28% equity in the platform, I added, retroactively vested. And a seat on the board. His eyes went wide. That's insane. The board will never agree. They will if they want their investors to show up tomorrow. I interrupted. Because without my update, you have no demo, just an expensive disaster. He leaned back in his chair, breathing slow and heavy. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, finally, you planned this, didn't you? His eyes narrowed. You set us up. No, I replied calmly. I protected what I built. We stared at each other. It was a silent battle, just posture and eyes. At last, Brian gave a stiff nod. I'll need it in writing, I added quickly. You'll have it by morning, he muttered. No, I said, tonight. Before I hand over anything. He stared at me, a mix of respect and resentment. You don't trust me. I gave him a small smile. You fired me. He finally stood and called Mary, who'd been waiting outside. Call legal, he told her. Now. It took 2 hours. The lawyers rushed to draft the paperwork, emailed it to my attorney, made edits, and sent it back for digital signatures. When Brian tried to lower my equity from 28% to 20% in the third draft, I didn't argue. I just stood up, picked up the USB drive, and headed for the door. If the contract isn't exactly what we agreed on, I said, pausing with my hand on the doorknob, the system stays down. So, does your company. 10 minutes later, Mary returned with the corrected contract. Once it was legally signed, I went back to the table and slid the USB drive to Brian. This will restore full system trust and bring everything back online, I explained. But it will also start an oversight loop. Every administrative change will now be reported to me. If you try to lock me out again, Axis Core will know and act. Brian looked at the drive as if it might bite him, but he didn't argue. He just nodded and whispered, Understood. I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. Just before I reached the elevator, Brian called after me. Violet. I stopped. You could have destroyed us, he said, almost softly. Why didn't you? I glanced over my shoulder. Because I didn't build Axis Core to break things, Brian. I built it to protect them, including myself. And as the elevator doors closed behind me, I left with my head high. This time, I wasn't being pushed out in disgrace. This time, I was in control. The next morning, I walked into Ashridge Solutions through the main doors, not as a visitor, not escorted by security, but as the returning architect. I had the signed agreement in my hand and a digital confirmation of my reinstatement already in HR system before sunrise. As I passed through the office, people glanced up from their desks. Some looked surprised, others seemed wary, and a few even seemed relieved. Jonathan met me near the developer area, his eyes saying more than words ever could. You actually did it, he whispered. I smiled. I'm not here for revenge, I told him quietly. I just want to make sure nobody messes with Axis Core without understanding what it truly is. But if I was honest, I wasn't completely sure about that. Part of me did want some payback, not with chaos, but by finally being seen. After 9 years of being invisible, it was a strange thrill to walk these halls and know everyone saw me for what I was. During the investor demo, Brian didn't look at me. He went through his usual speech about the future of automation and smart security. But when it came time to introduce Axis Core, his tone changed. And now, he said, forcing a smile, I'd like to introduce the system's original architect, our co-lead developer and strategic advisor, Violet Ball. There was not just a mention, but a real title. It was recognition, finally. The room full of investors turned toward me as I walked to the front. Good morning, I began. What you're about to see isn't just a platform. It's a system designed to think, to adapt, and most importantly, to protect. Not just from outside threats, but from inside ones too. Axis Core doesn't just react, it predicts. and it never forgets who helped build it. A few eyebrows went up at that last part. I didn't care. I wasn't there to play it safe. We ran the demo. Axis Core handled 7 complicated, simulated threats in real time. No mistakes, no hiccups. When the final test finished, the room erupted into excited chatter. Investors rushed to Brian to talk numbers, and several even came straight to me, asking about scaling, expansion, and partnerships. For the first time, people saw the mind behind the machine, not just the company logo. That afternoon, Brian called me into his office. "You made an impression," he said, not looking up from his computer. "I wasn't trying to impress," I replied. "I was just doing my job." He looked up, tired but sharper than before. "Some board members think we should make your role more official." I raised an eyebrow. "And what do you think?" "I think you're dangerous," he said, his voice flat, "but necessary." I smiled. "You should have realized that years ago." He didn't respond, and I didn't wait for him to. The weeks that followed were complicated. Not everyone welcomed me back. Some whispered that I had blackmailed my way in. Others avoided me, not sure which version of the story to believe. But I didn't need their approval. I had something better: access, oversight, and the proof that I belonged. One afternoon, while reviewing the audit logs, I spotted something strange. Axis Core had flagged multiple access attempts from restricted admin accounts. These attempts happened after I'd already returned. They all came from the same department, finance. I dug deeper and found partial downloads of source code and documentation, encrypted and split up, but still, they were mine. The next morning, I went straight to Brian and dropped a printed log on his desk. "Why is someone in your finance team trying to duplicate core files?" I asked. He barely looked at it. "I don't know, but I'll check into it." "No," I said firmly. "I will." That night, Axis Core sent me a high threat alert. Internal breach detected. Risk level critical. The system had found a new pattern. Someone was trying to clone the entire platform. Not to destroy it, not to change it, but to quietly copy it. Maybe to launch it under a new name, one without me attached. Brian had signed the papers to bring me back. But clearly, the fight for control was far from over. But someone still wanted me out. Only this time, they weren't being dramatic about it. Clearly, they hadn't learned from the last time. But I had. This time, I wouldn't just defend myself. I'd protect everything I'd created. And I wouldn't have to do it alone. The first rule in tech: trust the system, not the people. I'd learned that lesson the hard way. Axis Core had always been more than a piece of software to me. It was my design, my blueprint for true intelligent security. And now it was quietly warning me. Someone inside Ashridge was trying to copy its code. They were careful, working late at night, hiding behind VPNs and fake admin credentials, but they were getting close. The audit logs showed a string of encrypted data requests, all routed through hidden channels. But what the intruder didn't know was that Axis Core didn't just watch who logged in, it watched how they worked. It spotted patterns, checked for unusual activity, and tracked odd hours. Whoever was behind this kept returning to the same secret folders, the same lines of code, specifically the code behind Axis Core's neural prediction engine. That was the part that made it truly smart, the heart of the whole system. So I set a digital trap. Nothing obvious, just a bit of harmless code hidden deep inside some documentation files. It was useless on the surface, but if someone touched it, it would quietly send me a silent alert. At 3:03 a.m. that Friday, someone took the bait. My phone pinged, and when I checked the alert, I froze. The access wasn't random. It was Mary, Brian's assistant. The same Mary who had called me to invite me back. The one who smiled at me every morning like nothing had ever happened. Now I realized that smile had always been a mask. The next day, I requested the full logs for her account. What I found was worse than I'd expected. Over 40 unauthorized code pulls in just 5 weeks, multiple download attempts disguised as audits, and 4 data transfers sent to a strange domain. But what chilled me was this: the domain didn't belong to a competitor. It belonged to something called Ashridge Ventures, a shell company I'd never heard of. When I checked the business filings, I discovered Brian was listed as the primary executive officer and Mary as co-founder. They weren't just trying to push me out again. They were trying to quietly copy Axis Core, strip my name from the patents, and sell the clone to investors under a new name while keeping the original alive just long enough to cover their tracks. This wasn't just corporate greed. This was outright theft, and they thought I'd never notice. But they forgot. I built the system to fight back. That night, I activated the next level of the protection protocol, a kill switch hidden in the authentication layer. It wasn't destructive, but it was pure chaos for thieves. Anytime someone tried to steal code, the system would flood their session with fake data, scrambled files, and broken prototypes. It looked real, but it was nothing but smoke and mirrors. To a thief, it would seem like they'd stolen the real thing, but in reality, all they had was worthless junk. The next morning, Brian called me to his office. He looked pale, jaw clenched. "We need to talk," he said. "No hello, no small talk." "I figured we would," I replied as I stepped inside. He turned his tablet toward me. The screen was a mess, broken code, missing pieces, scripts that didn't work. What once looked like the neural engine now just looked like digital rubble. "This is from the internal development backup," he said quietly. Brian stared at the screen. "It's scrambled," he said. "Looks like someone accessed it without clearance." I kept my voice calm. Axis Core has defenses against anyone trying to copy it without permission. He stood up quickly. "Violet, if you've sabotaged..." "I haven't sabotaged anything," I interrupted. "Axis Core is just doing what it was built to do. It protects itself, even from you." Brian's eyes narrowed. "And what if I told you this has already gone too far? Investors were promised a new version, an expansion under a new company." I tilted my head slightly. "Then you're about to have a very uncomfortable board meeting." He stared at me, real anger showing on his face now. The kind that comes when someone knows they've been outsmarted at their own game. "You don't get to win this," he said, voice low. I just smiled. "I already did. You just haven't read the source code." And with that, I walked out, leaving him alone to wonder which parts of his kingdom were still real and which parts had already collapsed under his lies. But I wasn't finished. My next move was about more than defending myself. It was about making sure no one could ever steal from me again. 4 days later, the board held an emergency meeting, one I called Not Brian. I had sent a full report to every board member, filled with proof, access logs, security alerts, records of file transfers, and documentation about the shell company, Ashridge Ventures. Every detail was time-stamped, showing the attempted theft of Axis Core's source code and the plan to cut me out. I didn't have to exaggerate anything. The truth was bad enough. Brian walked in 15 minutes late, looking pale and tired. Mary didn't show up at all. The board reviewed every page in silence. Some looked shocked. Others were just wary, as if they'd suspected something was wrong all along. Finally, the board chairwoman, Linda Carter, looked at Brian. She was known for being direct, a woman who once called me brilliant but too quiet. "Do you deny any of this?" she asked him. Brian cleared his throat. Mary acted alone. I leaned forward. "Brian is the majority shareholder of Ashridge Ventures. Mary is a secondary officer. The code transfers came from her account, but the project was his idea." He said nothing. Linda turned to me. "And Axis Core?" "It's secure and working," I replied. "The real system is safe and under my control. The fake copy is ruined, full of decoys and scrambled code. The real one can't be stolen again." A board member asked, "Are you sure?" "Yes," I answered. "It doesn't trust anyone without my biometric sign-in now. And I'm happy to include independent oversight teams from now on. But Axis Core is protected legally and technically." There was a long silence. Then Linda closed the folder. "I think it's time for a change." The vote was quick and unanimous. Brian was removed as CEO within the hour. Mary's employment was ended, and the shell company was dissolved. The board named me interim CTO and gave me control of Axis Core's future. But honestly, that wasn't what meant the most to me. What mattered most was that, for the first time in 9 years, I didn't have to prove my value. It was in writing, official, signed, and recognized. In the weeks that followed, I worked to rebuild trust with engineers, the product team, and even the legal department who finally started calling me by name instead of just the tech lead. Axis Core's investor launch happened on schedule. We signed 8 major deals in just 3 weeks, including one with a global healthcare company that had lost millions to cyber attacks before. At the product reveal, I stood front and center. Not a shadow, not hidden in the background, but finally the face of the future. As the crowd applauded, my smartwatch buzzed with a silent update. System status, secure. Threats, neutralized. Integrity, restored. Protections, active. I smiled because Axis Core wasn't just my invention anymore, it was my armor. In the months that came after, I made sure that every new version of our platform followed the same main principle. Put ethics first, protect ownership, and keep everything transparent. We didn't just try to build smarter systems. We focused on building safer ones. These systems weren't just designed to stop hackers or viruses. They were built to protect against greed, betrayal, and even quiet dishonesty. One quiet afternoon, as I sat alone in my office, a young developer named Cynthia came by. She was new, full of energy and curiosity, and had just graduated. Cynthia was working on one of our AI projects. Nervously, she asked, "Can I ask you something? How did you know when to fight, when to push back, and when to walk away?" I thought about it for a while before answering honestly. "I didn't always know," I said. "But I learned how to tell the difference between protecting my pride and defending my work. And I realized when someone tried to take what I made, not because they cared or understood, but just because they thought they could, that's when I knew I had to stand my ground." Cynthia nodded, taking in my words. I could see she was saving that advice for later, hoping she'd never need it. Then I added, "Always protect what you build, whether it's your code, your ideas, or your peace of mind. Don't do it because someone might try to take it. Do it so you're ready for when they do." That's what I want you to remember. If someone tried to take away your credit for something you spent years building, what would you do? Would you quietly give up, or would you stand up and make sure they couldn't forget you? Life doesn't always give us the fairness we want, but sometimes the strongest thing you can do is get back up, reclaim your spot, and let your work show your worth. Because nobody can steal your integrity, you're the one who has to protect it.